Okay. Well, I can go first. I am a native of Winston-Salem, born and raised in Winston-Salem. As a matter of fact, I have roots not only here on campus, but also in the area in general. High school, I went to R.J. Reynolds High School here in Winston-Salem. My family actually started here in Winston in the Happy Hill Gardens area. My great-grandfather purchased land in the Happy Hill area, and we actually still own land in the Happy Hill Garden area. So my mother's family was raised in that area. We know that area well. I grew up knowing the Happy Hill community, and I lived in the eastern part of Winston-Salem growing up. I also have, as I mentioned, roots here with Winston-Salem State University. My father is a graduate of Winston-Salem State, and my mother worked here for almost 25 years. So that's kind of me personally as far as my background. I went to NC State University and finished NC State with a degree in architecture and have been working in Charlotte since I graduated. So that's a little bit about my background.
Good morning. I'm Jimmy Norwood. I'm from a small town that no one's heard of. It's Lenore, North Carolina, which is in the western part of the state. If you ever travel west on 40, there's a place called Hickory. Cut through there, you got Lenore. Lenore was known for furniture. So I grew up around a lot of construction, a lot of furniture building. So it was interesting for me to see these things. And while I was in school, I always thought I was going to be a furniture designer because I felt if I had to work in a furniture factory, I'll design the furniture. But it turned out I did, and I ended up going to school at Brevard College, played basketball there. It was a 2-year school when I went, so that was years ago. After that, I went to UNC Charlotte, graduated from there with an architectural degree. Came here to Winston, started working. And one of my first projects, I'm going to jump to one of the questions. One of my first projects was here on campus. It was a Virginia Norwood computer lab. I don't know if it's still if it's still here or not, but that was one of the first projects, which is in RJR. And from there, I worked at several other firms, and then I created my own firm back in 1994. Did several projects. One of the projects I did here on campus is the trading room over at RJR. I did that as my firm. And then I kept going. I worked at the North Carolina School of the Arts, which is where I work now. But I left and came here. I worked here on campus as the assistant vice chancellor for facilities. So I was over design and construction and facilities maintenance. And I worked here about 3.5 years, left and went back to North Carolina School of the Arts, and that's where I am now. So that's kind of my spiel, who and what I am.
Sure. Well, when I was young, art was a big strength of mine. I loved art. I was really good at art. And actually, in high school, I was voted the most likely to become an artist. So I loved to draw. I was also really good in math. So I really thought that architecture was the perfect combination of putting kind of math and geometry together with art. Also, as a little kid, I loved to do things related to building. Legos was my favorite toy as a kid. Loved playing Legos. But when I really started getting interested in architecture, it was actually from my sister. She started in architecture first, and she went to NC State in architecture. And she's 8 years older than I am. And I remember she would come home from school and she would have these projects and models and drawings that she had worked on. It was just really interesting to me. And that's what got me interested in it. And I would go to visit her at school, and I noticed that some of her professors, she had 2 professors, that were black. And when I saw them, and I knew that they were architects, that's what really let me think, well, I can really do this. Here I see a black professor, a black architect. This is something that I could really do. And also growing up, I got to know one black architect in particular, Harvey Gantt, where I went to church, which is right down the road, Mount Zion Baptist Church. His architecture firm designed the addition to our church. So during the process of that, when I was growing up at church, I got to meet him, saw the project that was going on, and then saw, well, here's another African-American architect that was somewhat of a role model to me. And that's a combination of, you know, my sister's experience and seeing other black architects is what got me interested in it and let me know that it was something that I could do.
Okay. I don't think it's influenced my architectural design. I think it's influenced my professional aspects. In other words, the truth is, when I went to school, there were 90 people in my class out of 300 in the entire college. And in my class, there's only one other black, and that was a female. So we worked together, but we understood that we were going to face some adversities that were, it was just natural. We're in the same realities of it. So it's that old adage that I heard when I was young: you got to do better, no matter what. You know, 15 minutes is on time is late. So those are the kind of things I try to carry through, and so it did affect me in that manner. But in general, I just learned that there are certain things that you have to do, and if you build relationships and you do good work, then you get treated the same. I mean, that's the realities of it. I have a practice still, even though I work at the School of the Arts. I have a practice, and I've had practice going on 30 years now. So I feel like that my designs, in some instances, have been inspired by what was there already, because there were renovations, or something that I saw. But I don't necessarily know it was because I'm black. I think it's more of my professional aspect that I see that, or it was pushed into.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about that. I think as an African American, it's made me work harder because I feel like there's still people out there who don't see us at the same level. They don't recognize our talents. And sometimes, for me personally, it made me strive to work a little bit harder to prove people wrong, to show them that I could do what others could do. And I can share a story with you, a personal story which gave me the drive to work harder. When I was at NC State, my freshman year, in one of our architecture studios, we were having a dinner where we invited the founder of the School of Architecture to come to meet with us and talk with us. He was, obviously, since he was a founder of the school, he was a very older gentleman. He was well into his 80s, maybe 90. So we were sitting around and he was talking to us, and I was the only black student there in the group. And he looked at me and he said, "You must be the token," in front of the entire group. So obviously that kind of took me back. I started thinking, well, this is a really old gentleman, obviously someone that should be respected, and it just completely caught me off guard, and the only thing I could think of to say was, well, I guess I am, which I probably shouldn't have said, but at the time that was really the only thing that popped into my head. But the good thing about that, what happened from that, is that drove me to work hard for the next 4 to 5 years in school to prove that I was there for a reason and that I deserved to be there. I wanted to prove him wrong, that I was not there as a token. And turned out, after 5 years, I finished at the top of the class in architecture at NC State. So, and honestly, I don't feel like that would have happened if I had not had that experience my freshman year, because that drove me to work hard the entire time that I was in school.
Well, I'm going to tell a personal story. I was in a meeting, and after the meeting, I got a call from a colleague that was an engineer, and it's funny when I think about it. He asked me who I was, and I told him I'm the architect. He said, "Oh, okay." He goes, "That's kind of strange." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, yesterday was a black guy we were on the phone. He said, yesterday was a black guy in the meeting that he said he was the architect." I said, "Oh, yeah, really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "So who was he?" And I said, "His name was Jimmy Norwood." And he goes, "Oh, really?" And he goes, and then he stopped because he realized what had happened. He was talking to Jimmy Norwood, and he just couldn't fathom that I'm an architect and I'm black. And because he thought the guy who told that he was the architect wasn't telling the truth. So I don't know if that was showing anything or other than his ignorance, but I don't know that it was malice, but it was just, it caught him off guard when I said, "You're talking to Jimmy Norwood, the architect." And I said, "Don't worry about it. No, it's okay. Things like this happen. It's not unusual." But there again, I think like Bronald, it made me stronger because then at that point in time I realized, hey, I have something to offer, and people don't even realize that I'm making that contribution.
I personally have not, but I have seen cases where there are clients who have been able to get projects through the permitting process a little bit quicker for whatever reason, whether it be race or contacts or having money. I think that there's a lot of politics sometimes that's involved with that. I personally have not experienced it, but I have seen, depending on the client, you can see the process happening a little differently.
I will say that while I haven't had any experiences with zoning or anything like that, and Michelle, this is a plug, our zoning and building officials here in the city of Winston-Salem are some of the greatest. But lending institutions are sometimes a problem because in my earlier time of practice, I did a lot of churches. And when churches would go to get loans, it was murder. I mean, it was really hard for them, particularly for blacks or African American churches. But for the white churches, they seemed to have no problem because I did both, black and white churches. But the lending institutions were really strict in the things that they asked for from the black churches. And I got to the point where I started understanding what they were going to ask. So I would tell the churches, these are the things you need to have in place. And if you have these in place, then it'll make it easier for you. there were still things that they would want that for some reason I did not understand. That there were times when the institution would say, we want individuals to sign, and I'm like, you don't sign. You know, it's the church, it's the entity, it's not an individual that needs to back this up. So from that standpoint, I've seen it, but not from any municipality.
I do. I know that when I was younger in the profession, just starting out, I got to have more opportunities to do design work, which was obviously really exciting. As I've progressed in my career, my position has changed. I'm a project manager, and what that involves is I work on the initial stages of the project with the client. I'm involved with design early on, and I work with engineers, but I'm also the person that's on site with the contractors during construction, and I get to see the end of the project as it's finishing up and that end product. And that's probably the most fulfilling part of the process for me, is to see that what starts as just an idea or a concept, and that creation, an image in somebody's head, something that I'm involved in, ultimately become a reality and see it actually built. And I get to see that entire process. There's some people that may not be able to get to see that entire process, but in my role, I get to see the entire thing. And I think creatively, that is what really excites me, is not just the drawings and what's on paper, but actually seeing it built, because that's an art in itself. The construction of the building is an art form, and to see the contractors actually working and how they lay brick and how they pour concrete, that is an art in itself, and I get to see all of it, and that's very stimulating to me. So.
Yeah, I agree with Bronald. The exciting thing for me is when you do a quick sketch, and that sketch starts to develop, and develops even more until it becomes construction documents or working drawings. And you're looking at a 24 by 36 sheet, and then the next thing you know, it's out in the field, and it's this building that's 100 by 20 or 100 by 100, and they're actually redrawing what you've already drawn, not by hand anymore, Bronald, but on the computer. You know, now we just push it in and it pops up. That's what everyone thinks, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But no, it is fun when you see that, or when I see someone else's drawings, or see someone else's construction. Like Ronald said, it's just so amazing to see what was in someone's mind become a reality. At some point in time, this space was in someone's mind, and it's just hard to fathom until you really start seeing these things go together. And when you see, you know, hard concrete and brick and all these things come together to make a space, it's just so exciting. And sitting in a space like this, which I think is a great space, I used to come in here to see Ms. Brown, and when I came through, it was just a nice space. It just had a good feel, and they did a good job on that. So yeah, that makes me excited.
One thing I will add is it also gives you an opportunity to brag a little bit. If you're driving down the street and point to a building and you say, yeah, I designed that. The work that I do primarily is higher education work, which is college and universities. So I work a lot on university and college campuses, and that's the majority of my work. And when you're designing for campuses, usually you have to design with the context of the buildings that are on that campus. For example, the type of building I would design here at Winston-Salem State would be different than the type of building I'm designing at Duke University, for example, where here it's more of a brick contemporary, Duke, stone, and Gothic. So for me, it has a lot to do with the area would be the context and the campus that I'm working on. And that really drives the style and type of architecture.
Yeah, I would agree, Bronald. And I think on that same lines, you find the context, and that context should start helping you maneuver your way through the end product. I will say there are some designers that are competition seekers, and despite what the context is, they're going to put their stamp on it, and it becomes an award-winning project. But then the question becomes, did it satisfy the context in which it was constructed? So that to me sometimes is a little bit trouble. Because having a building that fits in my mind, is a better fit for the client than this wonderful all glass on Duke's campus,
Yeah.
all glass,
Yeah.
steel monstrosity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just think that context plays a lot in what we're doing, or it should, in my opinion.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of.
Form follows function.
Yeah,
Or
form follows function. Yeah. Yeah, you'll see a lot of architects that are designing for themselves more than for the client. So you have to remember the client's more important. You know, you can also design for yourself, but ultimately you're doing the building for the client. So.
Other architects, I would say the one you shouldn't say, like Frank Lloyd Wright, but it's not. It's not. Louis Kahn is probably one of my favorite. More brutalist, hard, but I just like it. If you look at some of the stuff that he's done, it's just fascinating. Bronald mentioned someone earlier that's local, and that's Mr. Gann, Harvey Gann. You can go around this state and see a lot of stuff that he's done. And I admire him for several reasons, but one is because he was the first black student at Clemson University. And so, you know, just the adversity that he had to go through. You know, we're sitting here talking, and it's like, compared to what he had to go through, I imagine, it's totally different. But a lot of his designs are wonderful. The Harvey Gantt Center is a tribute to him, and I think some of the projects that have been designed by him are great. Another designer, he's passed away, and that's Phil Freelon, young guy. He's, I guess if Phil were alive, he'd probably be 68 years old now. But he did the African American Heritage Museum. He and David died, and I think Mr. Bond, Max Bond, the three of those were teamed up to do that. Those are
Yeah, I would have to mention Phil Freelon also. I noticed his poster is actually directly ahead of us there. I actually had the opportunity to work for Phil Freelon for 3 years. They opened an office in Charlotte. During the time that they had an office in Charlotte, I worked there for 3 years. Had the opportunity to work closely with him on a couple of projects, and he was a very inspirational person. His vision, his creativity, just his drive and passion for architecture was just amazing. So he's probably one of the individuals, African Americans, who has inspired me the most in my career. And it's very rare that people get to actually work directly with some of the people that are their inspiration, but fortunately, I had the opportunity to do that for a few years.
Let me just mention also, you spoke of Duke earlier, and the designer of the earlier, correct me if I'm wrong, earlier buildings on Duke campus was an African American.
Yep.
Julian Francis Abel. He never came to campus. He was from Philadelphia, I think it was, and he never made the campus because we were in the South. and they couldn't accept the fact that you had this black guy designing Duke campus. So I found that fascinating when you look at it. Another black architect of notoriety was Mr. Paul Williams out in California. Did a lot of work for the stars, and I think his daughter carried the firm on, but those are two people there, along with Mr. Bond, who I spoke of earlier, was instrumental in design and notoriety. Takes courage and determination.
Yeah, that's. So as I mentioned, I went to NC State University. I had went through 4 years, and then to become a licensed architect, you either have to have a 5th-year professional degree or a master's. After 4 years, I had the feeling where I just wanted to finish as quickly as I could. So I'm sure some students may have that feeling. So I opted for the 5th year. I did that 5th-year professional degree, which was required to be able to sit for the license, but you have to do an internship first before you can take the licensing exam. So I did an internship. It was about a 4-year internship. And at the time, the licensing exam then was different than it is now. Right now, it's all computerized.
So you're old, Bronald. Yes. That's right. I didn't realize that. The 9 parts.
Yes. It was 9 parts, and it was over, I think, 3 days.
Yep.
And you had to go there.
Yep.
And it was at the McKimmon Center in NC State, this large building where you go, and the first 2 days you're there from like 8 in the morning to 5 o'clock. And then the last day, it's like a half a day. They give you a break.
Oh, wrong. The exam was the 12-hour thing. Remember? Well, we had 8 to 8.
Oh, you had 8?
Yeah. So you packed your lunch and all this
you're
good
right.
stuff.
You're right. It was a full day. It was. Yeah, that's right. And you had, as he said, 8 or 9 different parts of the exam. If you didn't pass a part, you either had to wait 6 months or a year to retake it, depending on what the part was. And one of the parts was a drawing part, so you had to bring a drawing board. This wasn't on the computer. Everybody had to bring their own equipment to be able to draw. You had to make at least a 75 on each part of the exam to pass, or you had to wait 6 months or a year. 2 parts that I didn't pass, which I had to retake. I'll admit that. I made a 74. And I studied for 6 months to retake it. And when I retook it, I made a 75. So I was happy and I was angry at the same time. I was angry that I studied for 6 months and only got an extra point. But I did pass. So I was happy that I passed. So you have to do the internship, the exam, in addition to college education.
Yeah. That sounds similar to what I did. I took the exam. I think it was 2 that I missed. I think it was long span. MEP.
Yeah, MEP was the one that I had.
Mechanical, electrical,
Yes.
and plumbing. I think I had to take those 2 twice.
That was the one that I had the 74 and the 75.
Yeah.
So I'm not strong in engineering.
It's no joke, but it was fun, and I'm glad. That's why with me, Ron, I protect my license. So when someone says, "Will you seal this for me?" It's like, no.
Yes.
As a matter of side note, I was on the board of architecture for 4 years. Yeah, I was a secretary, and then I became president of the board of architecture in the state of North Carolina. And we would see all kind of people come through with different things that they were doing that they shouldn't have, and we would either fine them or take their license from them or suspend them or whatever. But it's a serious thing because architecture is more than just design, it's life safety. And that's the big part that a lot of people don't take away is that when you're designing, you're doing life safety. It's making sure that we're seeing this building, that we can get out safe in case there's an emergency, no matter what that emergency is. I'm going to divert just a little bit. So, one thing we're getting into now is security because of all the things that are happening, craziness with shootings and things. That's something we have to take into consideration now when we're in buildings and how to get you in and out and how to protect you while you're in the building. So that's a critical thing that we have to pay attention to. So having that license does make a difference. I'm not saying that someone doesn't have it, couldn't do it, but we have to one of the things we have to do is we have to maintain our continuing ed units. We have to have at least 12 for the state of North Carolina each year. And then if you're an AIA, which is a club. And I remember AIA, you have to have 18. So we are taking classes on a regular basis to become familiar with things as they evolve and change.
Let me mention one other thing, going back to the exam that I took. When you took the exam then, the way they have it now, you can take it individually. Just, you go to a computer. When I took it, you're in a room with everybody. It's a large room, everybody's sitting at a desk, and you're spaced out. They put a certain amount of distance between you. And when I was doing that, I remember looking around and thinking about it from the minority perspective and just looking around to see who else was in the room. And you could really get the feeling, or I did, that there's only a few of us in this room. Or there's only a few people of color in this room of 125, 150 people. And that, I remember that feeling sitting in that room and looking around and realizing that there wasn't many of us.
Victor was in there when I was taking.
Oh, yeah.
He's one number behind me.
Okay.
I'm 22 and he's 23. Victor Vines is an architect. He's done some work here on campus. He was the feel for him.
Yeah.
He's a great big guy.
Yeah, he's another African-American architect here in North Carolina. And he was the one who actually was the head of Freelon's Charlotte office when I worked for Freelon in Charlotte. One thing is when you're in a building, not everyone does this, but when you're in a building or a space, and I know I do this just because I'm an architect, but if you look around and you look at how the space is designed, sometimes it can tell you something about the person who designed the space. Whether the structure is exposed, it can tell you whether it's a designer that's really interested in structure or the type of materials that are used. And I would encourage you to really be more observant of the spaces that you're in and see what they can tell you about the individual who designed them. I think sometimes we take some things for granted, the creativity that's involved with individuals that work as architects. I know that my family kind of kids me a little bit that when we go into a building, that's the first thing I'm doing is I'm looking around and I point out things that they would never see. But I would encourage you to do that because it can tell you a lot about not only the building itself, but reveal things about the individual and the designer.
And I'll go back to the other thing as far as the public understanding is just that we serve a role to help protect the public because there are means of egress that we have to address, making sure that there's sprinkler systems or fire alarm systems and depends on the size. So that becomes critical on safety of the building. So the public being aware of that is something that I think plays into it.
One of the advantages that I have of working on college and university campuses is I have worked on multiple types of buildings. Because when you think about a college campus, it's not just academic buildings. It's residence halls, student centers, auditoriums, athletic facilities, offices. A college campus is probably the most unique setting of all because there's such a variety of types of architecture. And that's why I like the area of design that I'm in, because I get a wide range of building types that I get to work on. Not many people have that opportunity. The firm that I work for is a large firm, and we have different areas where some people just work on banks. So that's what they do every day, design banks. Some people just work with grocery stores. That's all they do every day. And that's great. If they enjoy that, that's their passion. That's great. I don't know if I could do that. But for college campuses, I just love it because it gives me so much opportunity to work on different types of buildings.
I've probably done a lot more churches than anything else. Churches and restaurants. As a matter of fact, the first project I had as a firm was a church in Charlotte. I love it because working with church folk can be interesting sometimes. The church comes out of me when I have to work with sometimes. Bring on. But no, seriously, it's one of those things where it becomes a unique experience because some of the churches I work with start out with these grandiose ideas and they don't have grandiose money. But somewhere down the road we come to a happy medium and it gets them what they need. Had a project once where it was in a small town and they had the church had seating capacity of somewhere around 600. And for some reason they wanted to be larger. They wanted 900 to 1,000 people. And after talking with them, they come to the realization that this town, I mean, the town probably only had about 18,000 people. And when it was a black church, and they realized they weren't going to get 1,000 people from the church. I mean, I don't know, too many churches here in Winston-Salem is going to get 1,000 people. But it's just working with churches is fun because when you see that end product, as Bronald was saying, when you get to the end and you're walking in and you're in that service for the grand opening or whatever they call it. But it's just wonderful because you're there and you accomplish something. And it's taking that was it 5 loaves and 6 fish or whatever it was and made something out of it. So that becomes fun. So church is probably more along.
It depends on what you what drives you. If you're driven by money, probably not. It's probably not the best career to be in. If you are a creative person and you love creating things and you love working with people, it's a career where you definitely have to work with people and of different varieties of people. I mean, from your client to the construction worker. That's a big difference in the type of individuals that you have to work with. What I would do, and one of the things that I try to do is I try to mentor young people that come to work for us, and especially the African Americans that come to work for us. We have some African American interns, and I have kind of taken ownership and served as a mentor to them because I really want to see more people of color get into architecture. There are not enough of us in architecture. I think it's important to reach out in the community and talk to students at schools, at high schools. I would encourage them, if they're interested in architecture, if they have talents in art and geometry. It's a great career to be in. It's very fulfilling. Especially, seeing that end product is very, very fulfilling. So I would encourage people, I would encourage young people to be interested in architecture if they feel like they have the ability to be able to do it. It takes patience. It takes a lot of patience. So if you're not a patient person, maybe it's not the best career for you to be involved in. But my thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree. It is. I'm going to go back to something earlier. Growing up in a small town, I didn't have any role models as far as architects. It wasn't until I went to architectural school that I realized that there were even architects in the city. There were two of them. One of them was an architect by longevity, meaning he didn't go to school for it, he just learned it, and then eventually over time he was allowed to take the license. And the other firm that was there did mostly commercial and industrial work. So it's just, you have to love it, and you have to know that that's what you're going to do. Because I agree with Bronald. Economically, it is hit and miss kind of thing. Depends on what type of design that you're doing with. So, but if you're doing it for the money, I wouldn't do it.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Yeah. I can tell you about a restoration project that I worked on in Charlotte. This was the original public high school in Charlotte, and it was located in the uptown Charlotte area. It was built in the 1920s, I think, 1923. And it was purchased by Central Piedmont Community College, which developed their main campus around what was the original high school. In the 60s, Central Piedmont Community College took this very traditional and ornate building, and they covered it up with just a brick, basically a brick facade, brick wall, which in the 60s was very popular, contemporary, just brick. That was the style of architecture. Well, about 15 years ago, Central Piedmont Community College wanted to take this building and they wanted to strip away this facade that had been covered and restore it back to its original appearance from a high school in 1920, I think it was 23. So our design was going back and looking at these very old drawings, trying to decipher what the original appearance was, determine how much was still behind this wall, how much we would have to come back and do new, and then how much we could preserve of what was existing. So it was a very interesting project of peeling away the exterior of this building, and when we peeled away the front of it, we had to do more design work because the conditions behind it were different than what we expected. But in the end, we went back and we made it look almost exactly like it looked when it was built. So it was a very interesting project. If you Google Charlotte High School, Central Piedmont, you'll probably see two different images. One of a traditional building and one of a modern building, but it's the same building.
I think that's interesting, Bronald, because a lot of times working on existing buildings, it gives you a language. It starts to talk to you because, as Bronald said, when you walk in, you see what was there before and how that person addressed the issues. And one of the buildings that's just up the street, Enterprise Center, is one that I worked on, and it was just fun because that building was 1920, 30, and 84. So you had all these different pieces that were put together. So the interesting and challenging part was to try and make it such that when you got finished, you had somewhat of a coherent and collaborative work that when you went in, you had wayfinding and you just didn't end up lost in the building. I'm not saying you don't get lost, but you try to make it so you don't. But just trying to understand what that building has gone through and said, like Ronald said, peeling away on some of the things that someone did before. Not that they were bad, but they weren't what you wanted to do, or what was interpreted for you. I live in a suburban house that I designed.
You designed
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so.
I tried to mimic bungalow style. Some of it's a story and a half, so I didn't want it to be the true two-story. Hardwood floors. There are windows. I mean, someone comes in my house and they're like, God, you have a window everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, I like light. But so that kind of, and when I design, I try and get as much light into a space. There's nothing like being in an office that doesn't have, which I have now, doesn't have a window in it, because you can't really feel what's happening. So I think that's kind of affected and kind of led me to where I live now.
I think for me, I've lived in 3 different houses since I've been in Charlotte, and they've all been, I guess, what's considered the suburbs. But I've always done new construction where I have the opportunity to provide input. Each one had a builder. I didn't design it, but I wanted to make sure in each case I'm working with a builder that allows me to have some input in what the design is. So they start with a plan, but I tell them that I'm going to change some things. And I want to make sure that I have a builder that allows me to be able to pick and choose some things. Obviously not major changes, not structural changes, but to have the input in the design. I think that that's important to be able to select things.
There has been for me. There have been projects that when I got finished with, I wished I would have done a little different because they didn't capture what the client wanted. But I was put there, or I took that path because usually, in this particular case, was the budget. There was only so much we could do, so we did that. But when I stepped back and looked at what it was like, wow. So I try and make sure that when I'm working with the client, it goes back to that church thing, that I guide them in a direction to say, I know what the end's going to be. If you don't take this route, we're going to end up back where we were before, or at least where I was before. So it's more so the failure was not paying attention to my budget and someone else's desire to get something more that they couldn't afford.
I've got one that's been a regret for about 25 years. And some people think that this is small, but and some people may not even care. But it's something that has bothered me. There is a medical office building in Charlotte that has a parking deck associated with it. And it has metal panels on the side of the parking deck. And during design, we were debating on between two colors of the metal panels for the parking deck. And I wasn't that seasoned at the time, but the project architect said, we were debating back and forth, which one? And the architect at the time, she said, I'll let you choose. So she let me choose between these two colors. And basically, I picked the wrong color. And it's been on this parking deck for 25 years.
You didn't drive by it wrong.
I do. I drive by it and I have to see it all the time. And
So you don't claim that?
and I look at it and I was like, oh, why did I pick that one? I should have picked the other one. It's the wrong color.
What were the colors? You have to tell us.
One was a buff color and one was kind of a reddish pink color. And I was trying to pick the reddish pink to match the brick, because the brick was red brick, but the panels look more pink than red. So I should have picked the buff, which was more of a neutral color, not trying to match the brick at all.
Yeah.
But I made the mistake of trying to match the brick. And it ended up being pink, and then there's this pink parking deck. It's in Charlotte.
I was not good in architectural history, personally. I liked it, no, but actually, when I was in school, I did some studying, and it kind of might get to what you're asking, but in African villages, there was the longhouse or the center that everyone went to, and to me, that's important when I'm doing design, that you have this focal point or location that gets everyone around. One thing I found, whether it's true or not, and please don't call me out in here, but when I was looking at that, and then when I did a little further study and saw that when slaves were brought here, they were not allowed to use that type of architecture anymore, where there was a central point. We live in a regimented system where the houses, the slave houses were put in rows rather than having a central location, because what was happening is it destroyed their whole notion of community, where you went to this focal point. And that's kind of why a lot of times the churches went to rush hours, because they went to this place that was their center and their community and brought them together, because they were living in these regimented places where before they were going to the longhouse and they were communing. And so you went here, and that was one of my projects that I used in school, was you had the central place, and from that central place you went back to your place, but you always went back to home. So like the fireplace is the heart, or the gate that leads you into a residence a lot of times, was to lead you back to that center point. So that's about as much as I could probably say to what you're...
No, that's absolutely beautiful. That was one thing I thought I might bring out tomorrow, is in parts of Africa, rather than the monumental things we think about from Ethiopia and Nubia and Egypt, You have, even today, you have these huge cities where they live, everybody lives in these concentric round houses. And then they live in that environment till they feel like, okay, this isn't good for the environment. And then the whole city shifts. So it's monumental in scope, but that sense of centrality, so beautiful. And, you know, obviously African Americans haven't been able to express that heritage as much as could be because it's a beautiful thing. Thank you.
One of the things that I liked working when I was with the Freelon group is Phil Freelon, when it was appropriate, he would try to bring culture into his architecture as much as he could, African American culture, if it was appropriate for the building. One example was the African American History Museum in Charlotte, where the exterior of the building, the pattern of the glass and the metal on the exterior is in the pattern, a contemporary version of an African quilt. So it's very interesting that's just one example of how he took that culture, that community, and the image of the African culture and incorporated it into his design. I noticed one of his actually that project's on the board that I see in the back there. It's the top photo. And then he did similar with the museum that he worked on at the mall in Washington, D.C. I don't think I have.
Reedsville, Charlotte, Salisbury, King, probably did a remodel at Mount Calvary over on 14th Street.
Yeah, I have not. Our firm is fairly large, but churches is actually one of the few building types that we don't do. One of the reasons is we've actually found that it's one of the most challenging clients.
Thanks for
Churches are very challenging clients.
More challenging than higher ed? Are you kidding me?
Well, it's easier to make a decision at higher ed than
Yeah, you have a system office pushing you there.
yeah. You have the president who makes it fine. Yeah, that's a good question. We, I don't know if you've heard of the LEED movement. I'm registered with LEED, and it's a sustainability effort to make all buildings as sustainable as possible. So as we're working on buildings, we take it as just a normal practice. We look for opportunities, whether it's in the lighting, low flow plumbing fixtures, any opportunity that we have to make buildings as efficient as possible. One of the projects that our group worked on in Florida, I personally did not work on this, but my firm worked on a school in Florida, which is the first net zero school in the state of Florida, which means it makes as much energy as it consumes. It captures as much energy as it consumes. So we're really trying to find opportunities to make buildings more sustainable. And then there's also the wellness movement to make buildings healthy for individuals in terms of air quality, the lighting levels. So we're really looking at those more.
And I think another thing that designers are starting to look into and push clients is to design buildings that are longevity buildings, that are 100-year buildings, and buildings that exist, not to throw them away, don't tear them down. Michelle, you can understand that. So it's like taking some of the older buildings and repurposing them to something that fits well with what they are. And that's what we did with the Boys and Girls Club, which is now the Enterprise Center. You know, there was this discussion about tearing it down. But then it was like, how could you tear this building down? It's been here for years, and it still has life. And I know in my hometown, where I went to elementary school, they no longer use it, but there's a push now to convert that to teacher housing. So there are things that people are doing now to use buildings. So that's in a sense sustainable, because you're not having to have new products. You have to go in and change the electrical and put in new lighting and plumbing and things, but that is a less challenge than one might think, and it also saves because you're not taking up new land. Thank you.
Beauty in terms of the architecture, beauty of the architecture.
Yeah. Or, you know, your physical environment as well.
Yeah.
Like, not just in the building, but also sort of the greater environment and how it might impact the feeling of the neighborhood or street.
I think it's the negative space. I think creating positive negative space, and that sounds crazy, but it's just that when you go into neighborhoods and they're just lined and, you know, segmented houses, and there's no space in that space, like outdoor space or small pocket parks or things like that. When you don't have those as release for the green space or where you can sit and meditate or get a moment, I think that affects you mentally. I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, or any of that, but just knowing how we function and go through day to day, you need that release. So I don't know if that's answering or getting close to it, but it's just that whole notion that what is normal negative space becomes a positive because you're using it in a manner that works. And walking around this campus, there are some locations that you can go, particularly like behind Blair Hall, that they put the gazebo. I mean, it gives you that rest place that you can go and kind of get away from this main thoroughfare.
I think one thing that we do with college campuses is when we start a project, we usually like to involve the students. We have a visioning session and a focus group session with the students. We want to find out what they like. On a college campus, the beauty of the campus that's a big part of it. And it's not just the courtyards and the trees, it's the buildings. You want attractive buildings for the students. You don't want spaces that are depressing for them, because they're going to be there for hopefully not more than 4 or 5 years. It could be more, but you want them to have a space that's beautiful, and that's part of the wellness, to make them feel good about themselves, to have a pleasant experience during that time in their lives. You can't do that if you're in a space that's depressing and dark. Light is a big part of it. I mean, I'm looking at this library, and just the light that's coming in that makes the space beautiful. Just the amount of light that you have coming in, it makes a big difference.
Well, I'll tell a story. It was when I was in my second year of architecture, and I had a professor, Bill, so he was an interesting professor. But I asked him to help me develop black architecture, and he looked at me in a strange way. He was Caucasian and Asian, so And he looked at me and he was a good professor. He said, architecture is architecture. It has to come from here. And it's not a black architecture. It's not a white architecture. It's not whatever. It's just architecture. It's how you project it and what you project is what it is. So what I'm saying is that I'm not sure that architecture has a race. I think that races create architecture, but at the end of the day, good architecture is good architecture. Bad architecture is bad architecture, no matter whom or what race did it. But I just think that there are some. I think in a sense we can celebrate the individuals that did it, but it's because that was an individual, and they just happened to be that race. So, like when I look at some of Phil Freeland's work or David Dye's work, it's amazing. And it's the same way if you look at Faye Jones, Thorn Chapel, or if you look at Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, you get a feel. I mean, it is a feel that you get, and in my opinion, it doesn't matter who did it. It's just it is good. So that's kind of what I look at.
I guess one thing I did mention was I was probably destined to be an architect. My grandfather went to A&T. Is it okay to say that here?
Yeah.
He went to A&T. And he was one of the first 3 students in the architectural engineering program at A&T State University. And I actually didn't find that out until after I had gone through architecture at NC State. I found an old photo of him with the 2 other students that were in the architectural engineering program. And I asked him about it. I said, what is this photo? Who are these guys? And he said, yeah, we were the first 3 in the architectural engineering program. So in some ways, I guess I was destined to go into it. My father was a commercial artist. So that was his profession. So that's where I got my art skills. But one thing that I would say to young people is don't let the lack of minorities in the profession keep you from pursuing it if it's something that you really want to do. It's a great career to be in. There's great opportunities, but you have to make some of the opportunities. You can't assume that they're just going to be given to you. You have to work hard, and if you really want to do it, you can do it. You can do it. And I saw those individuals early on that were role models for me, that drove me. They were inspirations for me. Some people may not necessarily have those role models or inspirations. I look for opportunities where I can be that role model for someone. But I would just encourage everyone to, if you have the interest, go for it.
I would also say, not just the architectural aspect, just construction. We've lost a lot. I mean, you step back and think about, like Mr. Black, who was featured. I mean, he made brick. I mean, that was pretty amazing. And we don't have, like when I first got here to Winston-Salem, there were concrete finishers, brick masons, carpenters, plasterers, plumbers. You don't see them. So we can design all day long, but we can't also build it. We might try. It'll be hard, but having that piece as well is really important. So just designing construction is just, I think they're joined at the hip, and it makes it better. So, and I will say that I actually worked construction for 4.5 years when I got out of school, and I worked my apprenticeship, and then I got my license, and I worked construction for 4.5 years just so I could understand what I was drawing, and it made a big difference. So I think getting those two to work together. So any person, young, old, whoever that wants to get into to architecture, if they learn how it goes together, it makes a big difference for them.
Sounds like you need to give a presentation to the high schools or to the middle schools so that you can plant the seed that may not be planted in them or planted in a different way. You know, they may not look at it.
I've done that. I've done that several times. There's guided counselors who will call, and I've gone to middle schools. And you're right. If you're going into architecture or construction, if you start at an earlier age, it gives you one up because when you get in high school, you get in college, and then you want to do it, there's so much you could have learned along the way. I do want to go back to one thing. I'm a firm believer, even though I like art, and I think I'm pretty decent at art, you don't have to be an artist to be an architect. You have to be creative. And one way to be creative is to read. I read a lot, and if you read, that helps you develop ideas, that helps you to see things. And if you read, and a lot of times when I'm working on projects and I get stumped on a project, I'll read, and that reading kind of unlocks that thought process, and it gets me back into where I need to be, because it gives my imagination some massage. That's one thing I would say. Yes.
Light.
That's true.
Yes, the light.
The openness that's in this space is amazing. I mean, and it feels good. And the other thing I think about this building is you have spaces, open spaces, but then you have spaces that narrow down. And I think like that area up there is, set up for a particular use. And that makes a difference. There again, it gets back to when we were talking about going, rather than having things set up, you have these places you can break away to and have solace and kind of get out of the way, out of the main traffic. So I think, I can't remember who did this building. I'm not sure. I can't remember if it was, oh gosh, I should know, because I had those rounds and stuff.
Was this O'Brien?
I think that's who it was. I think it was O'Brien. So, but that to me is what I see, because this is actually an addition to the older portion.
Because we're in the older portion that I think was built in 67, and there's so many different
Yeah.
editions. This is the newer section.
Yeah, this is the newer
This
section.
is the
But this is great. I mean, this is what it takes, for individuals to understand. That architecture is a predominantly male, white male, and it's not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. But I'm beginning to see, and I didn't talk about it, and I probably should have. There are a lot of African American women that are architects, and they're prominent. You have some that I was looking in. I think I'm going to say this right. Martha's Vineyard. Part of that was designed by a black female. I think she went to Hampton, and that was in the early. It was in the 1920s, I think, when she and her sister purchased land there, and they made it. I think it was Martha's Vineyard.
And I believe the first African American that was a member of the American Institute of Architects was actually a woman. not
Well,
a
the
man.
president now is a black female.
Oh, the AIA?
Kimberly Dowell.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's the president of the AIA. It's male. Now, I would say that it's probably the race in which that, whatever nationality it is, yeah. But there again, I think it's one of those things where, once it became a licensed thing, because, architecture's been going along for a long time before, because it used to be master builder, and it wasn't architect, it was that individual, not only designed, they built it. So it was a master builder. And then someone decided, hey, we're gonna create a license, and now, you have a design team, and then you have a construction team. So I think it was just by default. And of course, when you look at cities like Charleston, DC, Savannah, who built it? And so there are some things. Thomas Day was a famous cabinet maker, and that's phenomenal in itself. Design there again, and not only did he do, there were stairs and things that he did as well. So that's pretty amazing, or it is to me.
Many of the people you mentioned there are in this exhibit.
Yeah.
So,
And there are a lot of blacks who do the work of architecture, but they're not counted in that number because,
Right.
as he said, they're not licensed. But there are lots of drafters, people that work in architecture firms that do a lot of the drawing, the computer and CAD work, but they're not counted in those numbers because they're not licensed.
Yeah. Well, for me, the license, I guess the word is legitimizes your ability to take that exam that we had to stroke through. But it also, by having that license, you have to maintain so many credits. So you're held accountable when it comes to codes and regulations. So I think that's what helps with the license part. Not saying that a person who doesn't have the license doesn't know that, but we have to, like, they'll do an audit, and if you haven't done this, and when you, each year when you renew, you have to put down that I have my credits that are required. So I think that's what helps with the license.
When you said that AIA was a club and you kind of laughed, is that,
I'm a member of it, so I can say it.
is that reflective of something racial or economic?
I think, I don't know if it's racial or economic. I just think that the AIA is overrated when it comes to the general public, because most people think if you don't say you're AIA, you're not an architect. They equate architecture with AIA, but you don't have to. You can be an associate of AIA, and you can have a license and not be AIA. But a lot of people, when they see AIA, they automatically, that's a good architect right there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the
that's what
AIA
it is.
part is the conferences, the meetings and stuff like that, yeah. Yes.
That you have to pay for along with your license, with your membership.
Yeah.
We do not, we hire people to do that. Don't we, Bronald?
Yes, that's correct.
As a matter of fact, we're working on the Stevens Center. So that's one of the big projects and exciting projects. And Bronald's firm is doing the phase 1 of that. So, but we don't, but we get to see them, and it's interesting when they're going through, and being able to go to some of the plays that are there, or symphonies or different things. So it is exciting to be there because there is creativity. But just being on college campuses is the same thing. Because when I was here, just learning is creativity in itself. And just watching, Bronald said this earlier, as an architect you have to like people. or at least they have to tolerate you. So that makes it fun when you see young students interacting with one another, and you get to periodically see them. This has nothing to do with what you're asking me, but I got to tell the story. I was on campus one day here. I was walking, and there was a young man in front of me, and I said, "Come on, bruh." And he said, "I know." And right away, he pulled his pants up. And it was just the fact that it was that connection. And so I'm saying that to say that sometimes you hear these horror stories that people say that young people, but they do care. I mean, they're our future, and I think having this interaction with students when you're there, it makes me feel good, and that does help my creativity because I'm like, hey, there's something out here that's more than just what you read on the news, that the gloom and doom. So yeah, I know, and that's just something. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm wrong, and it's like, wow, I was just looking determined and said, who are you, old man? No, it's like, so I mean, they're to be. The young people are to be celebrated and applauded as well.
Well, we can ours.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.